Okay, good morning and welcome to the second day of Britannic's virtual Convergence Summit. I'm certainly testing the work from anywhere principle today. On the way in, there was a car accident and big traffic queues on the road, so I've turned off. I'm currently in a Starbucks, so the plan is now to get to the office, and we've got a wonderful presentation for you now from Amy Hupe around the value of design systems. So it's one I've been really looking forward to. I hope you enjoy it. Have a great second day. Thank you. Amy, over to you.
Hello. Yes, thank you very much for having me. I hope that you're all doing okay out there, given this very odd year that we're in. So for those of you that don't know me, I'll just give a bit of background. My name's Amy and I am a self-employed design systems expert, and I'm currently contracting for the BT Group as a product manager, and I'm leading a multidisciplinary product team in building a design system for them. But my background is actually slightly different. So originally I was a writer and an editor. And I started out my career working as a researcher and then a writer and then an editor at the Consumers Association, which some of you might have heard of. So I spent about 6 years working there, and I worked across a pretty eclectic range of product areas, including compost and spiralizers, energy companies, lawnmowers, the property market, and even Christmas puddings. And this is my proudest moment. I actually did make it into the magazine once as well. So this super candid shot of me is from a news story in Which Gardening in 2015 about out-of-date compost on sale in garden centres. And I was pretty happy with myself when I unearthed that one. I'm so sorry, that was an absolutely terrible pun. And I can't hear anyone, so I don't know how badly it went down like a lead balloon. But anyway, enough of that. So yes, in 2016, I left Which and left behind that career in very serious journalism. And I came to work here at the Government Digital Service, or GDS. And so I think most of you will have heard of GDS, but for those of you who perhaps aren't familiar with it, GDS is part of the Cabinet Office, and it's probably best known for its work building and maintaining gov.uk, so the website that hosts the information about the UK government and guidance for citizens. And gov.uk also brings together government services together in one place. So that's things like tax a vehicle, or register to vote, or apply for a passport, or even report treasure. So yeah, just all the standard stuff really. So I worked at GDS for 3 years, from the start of 2017 until the end of last year. And I joined them and went to work as a content design lead for this team. So it was a multidisciplinary team of product designers, developers, researchers, and we also had a product and delivery manager. And this is us looking very happy with ourselves in mid-2018 when we launched this thing. So this is the GovUK design system, and I'm going to talk much more about that over the next half an hour or so. But suffice to say, I absolutely loved my time there, and I became really interested in the design system and actually in design systems in general. So much so that when I left GDS at the end of last year, I went straight to work on another one, this time for a healthcare tech company called Babylon Health, which some of you might have heard of. And I worked on the design system there as a product manager, and I helped the team to launch it and start to scale it across the organisation. And now I work on one for the BT Group, which includes BT, but also EE and PlusNet. Unfortunately, I can't show you a picture of this one as it doesn't actually exist yet, but I'm working there as a product owner and leading a small team of 10 to design and deliver it. So that's just a whistle-stop tour of my career and how I've ended up working in this space. And today I'm going to talk to you about design systems and the value that they bring to organisations, and in particular in the context of today's theme, lean business operations. But before I get into it, I want to take a couple of steps back at this point, because having spent the first chunk of my career working as a professional wordsmith, I placed a lot of emphasis on language and definitions. And I think it's really important to make sure that we're clear. So my expectation is that some of you will have probably a very good understanding of the term design system, and some of you might be unfamiliar with it. And whichever camp you fall into, your understanding might be different from mine. And that's because if you Google what's a design system, then you'll find various different explanations, some of them conflicting and kind of quite confusing. So I want to start by giving you my definition of what design systems are, so that we can make sure that we're on the same page as I go through this talk. And one of the clearest and the most succinct definitions of design systems that I've encountered comes from another design systems expert called Alla Kolmatova. And she describes design systems as a set of connected patterns and shared practices coherently organized to serve the purposes of a digital product. Now, this actually comes from Alla's book, Design Systems, for which I'm not on commission, or not yet at least, but which I do really recommend if you're interested to know more about them. It's very good. She does lots of case studies and things. But this definition, as good as I think it is, it might still be a bit abstract if you've not worked with a design system before. So I'm going to attempt to bring it to life a little bit by just walking you through the design system that got me into design systems in the first place. So the Gov.uk design system. So before gov.uk existed, there were hundreds of different government websites, all with different identities. I'm sure some of you remember this. And that meant it was often quite hard to know whether you were really on an official government website or not. And then in 2012, GDS launched gov.uk as the single website for UK government services and information. So it's got a clear, consistent identity, and that means that when you travel through different parts of gov.uk, it looks and works in a way that is recognisable and familiar and easy to use. And maintaining this visual and functional identity is really important, but it is really challenging too, because although gov.uk is designed to look and feel like one website to its users, it's actually designed and delivered by hundreds of different service teams spread across 25 different ministerial departments. And those teams are based all around the country, occasionally beyond, and they're all working independently and at the same time, and often to tight budgets and deadlines that can't be changed. So our big challenge in my team was, how might we help those teams to efficiently deliver usable, accessible services that all look and feel distinctly like gov.uk, when the reality behind the scenes might be a bit more like this, with parts of the same service often being delivered by different departments. So one of the ways that we help to solve this problem is with the design system that my team and I built. So this is what it looks like, and it's publicly available, so you can go and see it at gov.uk/design-system. And it's where GDS documents the design guidelines and common solutions to start with when you're designing or building government services. So it contains styles for things like colours, typography, lists and links. And it also includes common user interface elements, so things like buttons and form inputs and error messages. And it also includes guidance on best practice for common tasks and page types. So things like how to ask users for their name on gov.uk, or how to help them create an account if it's a service that needs you to log in. But this website is just one part of the system, and design systems are typically not just static products that set standards and give guidance. As the name suggests, they're whole systems, so they're things with tools and processes that help teams to use and contribute to them. So the gov.uk design system also encompasses a front-end framework called gov.uk frontend, which lets developers implement the design system's components and standards in production. And for designers, there's the gov.uk prototype kit, which lets you build high fidelity prototypes to take out to user research using design system components and styles. And these are really just the most visible artifacts and products of the design system. But just as important as these things are the community of practice of contributors and users and supporters that we built up around it, and all of the spaces and processes and touch points that let them participate and contribute to it. And so for that reason, the design system also incorporates an open backlog, which lives on GitHub. And people use it to share examples and ask questions and propose improvements to the design system. And in this way, the community can share knowledge with each other and help to improve things over time in the design system. And to make sure that the design system incorporates the latest research and design and development from across government, it also has an open contribution model with a decentralized quality assurance model to help the things that it contains make sure that it meets the needs of the large audience that uses it. So now I hope after that quick tour of the GovUK design system, you've got a clearer picture of what design systems are and what I'm talking about as I go through this talk. So today I want to talk to you about the value that they bring to organisations and how, when they're done well, they can become a cornerstone of lean business models. And I think that there are three primary ways that they do this. So when they're implemented and run effectively and they're properly funded, design systems can drastically reduce waste in the product design and development process. They can support continuous improvement of products and services and the teams that use them. And they can improve agility, making organisations much more resilient to change. So let's talk through those claims now one by one, starting off with the first one. Design systems reduce waste. So at the most basic level, design systems exist to solve the common problems centrally and to solve them well enough and make those solutions reusable so that teams can focus on the unique challenges that they're facing. But to understand what that looks like in practice, it's helpful to think about how those inefficiencies occur in the first place in the product design and development process, and how quickly those inefficiencies can scale if they're not reined in. So I'm going to focus on that and walk through the example of a button, which is a seemingly straightforward UI element consisting of just some text on a background shape. But buttons actually encapsulate a number of an organisation's fundamental design decisions, which cut across its products. So we've got its border radius, and then there's the background colour, and its margin, and then there's the text colour and the typography and padding. And although these might all seem like fairly inconsequential things, getting company-wide agreement on any of these things is something that usually takes a fair bit of time and effort and careful coordination. And just to complicate things further, we also have to think about different states. So not just the default, but also what does it look like when you hover over it? And what's the focus or active state? And do we need to have a disabled button? And we'll usually also have to think about different button styles, like secondary text buttons, or even buttons for specific contexts, like sales or purchase buttons. And most organisations have more than one type of button across their websites and applications. So even gov.uk, which is a fairly minimalist website, has different versions of a button. And so again, creating these styles takes time, and trying to align an organisation on a standard approach to them is something that requires effort, otherwise it just doesn't happen. And our products might also need to incorporate different sized buttons for different page layouts or to create hierarchy within pages. And we also have to think about different button types. So for instance, we might want to add icons as well as text to our buttons. And we might want to use only an icon on certain buttons, or we might want to create buttons for drop-down menus that reveal a list of options, or even split a button to support two related actions. And then we'll probably also have to think about how our button works on different backgrounds. So in dark mode and light mode, for example, or even within different product themes. So let's just think for a second about the people who are building these buttons. So if we've got a small team who are working on buttons as part of a new product or feature, and that team includes a designer, an engineer, and a QA tester, at a conservative guess, that team's going to cost you about £100 an hour. And if we imagine that it takes that team, say 200 hours combined to design, build and test this system of buttons, accounting for all of the states and variants and themes we spoke about, which is not uncommon, at £100 an hour, that's going to cost £20,000. And if you have 50 teams across your organisation, all making buttons for different product areas or marketing sites and applications, which is really not unfathomable at a large enterprise, that's going to cost you £1 million just to have good buttons. And without a design system to act as a source of truth, you're also going to see significant inconsistency and variation in quality across your product landscape as well. And we've only talked about buttons in this example, but when you start to think about all of the other design elements and user journeys and contexts that get created from scratch every time they're needed in the absence of a design system, you can quickly see how this becomes a very expensive operation. And no one wants this. So what design systems do is they drastically reduce this duplication of effort, or in the best cases, they can eliminate it altogether. They create a single source of truth for design and usage guidance and code to stop siloed working and reduce waste in the design and development process. So let's move on now to the second point. Design systems support continuous improvement. So by reducing duplication of effort and creating a single source of truth for the common problems that designers and developers share, design systems increase the speed with which we can build, design and test new product features. So the faster that we can build and test new products and features, the quicker that we can learn from the real experiences of customers. But this is perhaps the most obvious and most talked about, and in my opinion, probably the least interesting way that design systems support continuous improvement. So I'm actually going to talk about a different one now. With a central design system, we can centralize the value of our sort of organization and the knowledge and experiences of our teams across our company and continually improve standards for everyone. So I'm going to jump into an example here. And the example I'm going to talk about involves this team. So this is the team that I worked with at Babylon Health earlier this year. And when this photo was taken, obviously social distancing was not in effect at this point. And we were very happy because we just launched the design system for Babylon. So it was called DNA, just to stick with the healthcare theme. And the first version of it contained a set of brand guidelines, as well as some components and some content guidance. And it was all based on what teams were already using. And that's because before DNA existed, the teams at Babylon were working from various different design and code libraries to design and build their products. So they had started to try and do this consolidation, but before the DNA came along, the problem was that there were lots of them and they were split across different spaces and tools. And so for our first release of DNA, our focus had just been on bringing everything together in one place to try and stem the flow of new versions, to try and consolidate resources down into one single central space. And once we'd done that, our next step was to make it better. So having successfully centralized everything, we then had to focus on raising the standard and improving the quality of our products across the board. So we wanted to make sure that our components were accessible, responsive, that they adhered to the Babylon brand, and that they were flexible enough to use across different platforms. And at Babylon, we also had to think about how the system might support different partner products, because Babylon provides software not just for its own products, but also for various partners. And so we had to think about how we would handle that in the system as well. And there was a fair amount of work to do for us to get to this point. And so we started to pick through components one by one and to review and improve them. And we had a small team, so it was a designer, a developer, and a content designer working closely together to carry out research and to design and document and try and rebuild the basics of our UI from the ground up, with a real focus on just making them simple and scalable and accessible. But we didn't get that far into it before our colleagues really wanted to know more about what we were up to. So we'd get questions from teams wanting to know when the new components would be ready, so that they would know whether they should wait and include them in their next release, or push ahead with a product level version and then just come back and update them later. And we'd get feedback from developers and designers about bugs and issues with existing components. So, for example, telling us that certain components didn't work correctly in browser versions or with different operating systems. And we'd also get requests to contribute new components or improvements to existing ones. And we started to realize that by reworking these components through a closed process just carried out within our team, we were missing out on an important opportunity to try and build awareness and support for the design system, and also to get valuable insights that would inform the improvements that we were making. And so we opened this process up. So unlike at GDS, at Babylon, we didn't have a team big enough to support a large-scale, very comprehensive contribution model. And we also didn't necessarily have the bandwidth to support contribution reactively in response to people coming to us and asking to contribute, alongside the work that we were doing to build out the design system. So we had to think about how we would take control of this process in a way that wouldn't overwhelm us. And so we started to run these weekly sessions called Atomic Thursdays, with every week being dedicated to reviewing and improving just a single component. So we'd create posters like these ones that you can see here, and we would advertise the session internally each week across our Slack channels and our newsletters, telling people what we'd be focusing on so that they would know whether it was relevant or not, and they could decide whether to attend based on that. And then in the sessions, we'd hear from designers and developers who were actually using the components day to day about how to improve them based on user needs and actual kind of user research and experience that they'd encountered when running their products. We'd also have representatives there from our team who understood how to systematize these components. And as well as that, we would invite along experts across the company in content design and accessibility and engineering and visual design, who would come along and provide feedback using their subject matter knowledge and their professional experience. And through this process, we not only made our components richer and more representative, but we also created a space to share knowledge and to learn from each other. And so in this process of designing in the open, not only did we improve the standard of Babylon's products, but we also increased the knowledge and skills of the individuals in our organisation. And so when I talk about how design systems support continuous improvement, I want to really stress that this isn't just about our outputs and our products, but it's also about the improvement of our organisation as a whole and the teams within it. So design systems don't just improve products, but they actually elevate the skills and the experience of a whole organisation. And so now I'm going to move on to my final point. So design systems improve agility. And one of the best ways that I can think of to bring this concept to light is by talking about an artifact of design systems called design tokens. So at this point, if we were all in a big conference hall and I could see you all, I would ask for a show of hands just to find out who's heard of design tokens. But to be fair, if you all put your hands up at this point, it would essentially ruin the next 10 minutes of my talk. So since I can't do that anyway, I'm going to cater to those of you that might not have heard of design tokens, and I'm going to explain how they work. So design tokens are essentially named entities used in place of raw values to define and distribute the foundational layer of our UI design. So without tokens, when we want to try and create a standard style for something like a button, we have to decide, as an example, what color it should be. And we define that as a raw value. So usually something called a hex or an RGB value for colors. So say that we define this style and we write it down and we share it across the organization for our audience to use. Well, when a developer wants to follow that style in the product that they're working on, what they'll do is they'll look at those raw values and they'll recreate them in their production version of the button. And what this means is that there's no actual link between the values that are stipulated in that documented button style in our design guidelines and the button that exists in production. So each of our buttons in production has to be maintained separately. And so if we want to change the color, for example, if we're going through a rebrand in our organization, then it has to be done manually in every product which uses that type of button. And if you've ever been in an organization during a big sort of product rebrand, then you'll know how slow and painful this can be. And so with tokens, what we can do is create links which let us keep those things in sync more easily. And we do that in layers. So at the first layer, all we do is give a name to those raw values. So for the color that I just showed, for example, instead of saying that it's hex 494A4C, we would give it a name. So in this example, let's call it brand charcoal. And from there, we can then associate the color name with the thing that it represents. So in our example, let's say that brand charcoal is actually our brand's primary color. So it's the main color that we use across our digital products. So we're going to call it brand primary. And from there, we can then make specific design decisions about how we want to use these colors in practice in our components, and we can associate them with those lower level tokens. So let's take the example of our button. Say that we want it to use the brand primary color as its background. Then what we'll do is we'll set our button background color to brand primary. And so in this world, when a developer creates a button, they can do it using centrally defined and maintained design tokens rather than using those raw values. And then the token that they've used goes back up the layers that we've created, and they find the original values. So this is how tokens work. And I'm aware that this might be quite complicated and quite technical, especially if you've not come across tokens before. But what's really important to us here is the implications of this. So using design tokens, what it means is that we can define and distribute our design decisions automatically across our products, making everything more unified and much easier to update. So we can decide to define these things centrally and share them across the organization. And if we suddenly decided that actually we wanted to change all of our products' primary buttons from charcoal to red, then all we would do is update the token, and the developers across our organization would just run a quick update, and those changes would be rolled out across all of the products using our tokens. And I've only talked about colors here, but this example from the Salesforce design system shows the breadth of what tokens can do. So we can use tokens to define our colors, but also our fonts, opacity, line heights, spacing, radius, layouts, really all kinds of things. And they can also be created in a way that lets them be used across different platforms. So we can define these once in a central space, and they can be used across web and native applications. And we can distribute them directly into design tools as well, like Figma or Sketch. So designers and engineers can work from a single source of truth. And this massively improves the efficiency and the visibility of our design process. So in this way, design tokens can be used to define and maintain lots of our foundational design decisions, which helps us to massively increase the efficiency of our product design and development work, and to introduce large-scale changes more easily. And by codifying and systematizing the building blocks of our design like this, it frees us up to concentrate on new challenges when we're presented with them. And obviously all of us have faced a very real need to do that this year. So when the coronavirus pandemic took hold and much of the world went into lockdown, the demand on our digital services grew quickly and exponentially. So experiences which may have been passable or acceptable in a pre-COVID world, where offline channels were more readily available to support and assist them, were no longer viable. And many organizations providing offline services had to quickly think about creating digital alternatives. And this was really no time for any of us to be negotiating the basic design decisions of our products. And so I'm going to talk now about 2 examples of how organisations were able to mobilise quickly by leaning on mature codified design systems. So the first example that I want to share is from Barnardo's. So for those of you who don't know, Barnardo's is the oldest children's charity in the UK. So it's about 150 years old and it employs around 30,000 staff and volunteers. And given its size and the fact that it's a charity and its age, agility is maybe not a characteristic that we would expect to associate with Barnardo's. But back in 2016, Barnardo's launched a strategy to design and deliver the next generation of children's health and social care. And this strategy included a design system. So this is what it looks like. I believe it is also publicly available, so you can go and have a look at this. And like most design systems, it includes things like design assets and UI components and design patterns and standards and principles and guidance, and also a product kit to create your product. So there's nothing kind of groundbreaking here. This is a pretty typical design system. But fast forward to 2020, and Barnardo's faced, like the rest of us, an unprecedented challenge. So like many organisations, Barnardo's had to quickly find alternatives to the face-to-face services that it offers currently. And one of the ways that it did this was to introduce a new online service called See, Hear, Respond. So this service is funded by the Department for Education, and it's delivered by a coalition of charities led by Barnardo's to provide much needed support to children who are falling through the cracks at this time. So what it does is work with schools and other agencies to find children who are hidden from view, who are currently not receiving support from statutory organisations, and those who are at risk or who are experiencing an adverse impact to their health and their well-being whilst the pandemic is going on. So the Barnardo's See, Hear, Respond service was designed and delivered in 3 weeks. And since it launched, it's been used for over 10,000 referrals. And last week, I spoke to one of the team who had been involved in the creation of the design system and who'd been involved in this project. And they told me that this just would not have been possible without the design system. So having this mature codified design system has allowed them to move much more quickly at a really critical time. And the second example that I'm now going to talk about brings us back to where we started. So I'm going to talk about gov.uk. So government digital services need to vary in terms of their context and their underlying policy. And obviously a lot of new stuff has been created this year in response to coronavirus. But the basic structure and the UI elements that are used in government services can often be reused. So most public services have a simple and common structure that you've probably encountered and will be familiar with. So whether you're applying for a driving license or registering to vote, or you're taxing a vehicle, you're likely going to encounter a start page, which introduces you to the service, and then a series of questions, and then a chance to check the answers that you've given, and then a confirmation at the end once you've submitted the information that you've provided. And so apart from a few service-specific nuances, this just works. It's been tried and tested many, many times over, and there's rarely a genuine need for it to change. So the gov.uk design system provides templates for all of the pages that are needed to construct this flow, so it can be put together really quickly. And likewise, if you're on gov.uk, then you really don't need for these kind of things to be different. So in fact, if you're having to interact with government frequently, which lots of us are right now, whether we want to or not, then having recognisable form inputs and notifications and error messages and calls to action is just going to help us get through them much more quickly. So since the start of the pandemic, GDS has shipped 5 new services. And so that represents over 60 individual web pages that have had to be designed and built from scratch. And all of them have used the gov.uk design system. And one of those services was the Offer Coronavirus Support from Your Business service. And this service lets businesses tell the government how their organisation might be able to help with the response to coronavirus. So the team that developed this service were able to start designing the service and then get it into production in less than 4 days. So that service instantly became one of the most popular services on gov.uk. And that's 4 days in the middle of a global crisis for a public sector organisation to make a service that takes potentially life-saving information and get it securely to authorities so that they can plan. And as you can imagine, working in government, there are always multiple layers of negotiation and fact-checking and sign-off that have to be carried out alongside building the digital component to this service. So with so many new challenges to tackle, having a design system that provides reusable solutions to these common problems was absolutely critical. And this is where I'm going to finish up today. So design systems can be incredibly complex and sophisticated in their execution, but what they actually do is pretty straightforward. They reduce waste by centralizing solutions and removing duplication of effort. They support continuous improvement of our products by enabling teams to move faster, increasing the speed with which we can build and test new products and features. But as I've talked about, they also support continuous improvement of our teams and organizations by eliminating knowledge silos and creating opportunities to share skills and experience and research findings across our companies through collaborative open working. And finally, they improve agility. They take care of the basics and the knowns so that teams can focus on adapting to change and solving new problems when it really counts. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy. Brilliant presentation, some really insightful points in there. Hope you've all taken a lot from it. Work from anywhere. I'm now in the office, so hello again. So do we have any questions for Amy following the presentation? I'm just scrolling through the chat system. Okay, I can't see any at the moment. If there are any, please do add them. Good feedback. It looks very good. People very much enjoyed the presentation, and also just looking at some of the points there that good insight around helping people with a new website they're looking at, but also applies to internal systems as well. And I think that's an important aspect here, is that when we're looking at design thinking, we've got to consider things both from a customer and also an employee perspective. Engineering out waste is about improving the access and reducing effort and friction for all users of technology. So point I made yesterday, technology should help, not hinder. So Amy, thank you very much. As I said, just all very positive feedback. I've got one question here, so in fact, we're starting to get some questions through, so that's good. So the first one is, we're a small organisation. Do you see this working in a small setting?
Definitely. I mean, I'd actually say start when it's small, especially if you've got kind of ambitions to scale. It's much easier to set up a design system and get those foundations in place, and then kind of scale it with your organisation than it is to try and retroactively create a design system in a very large organisation. So yes, absolutely, I see it working. Okay, brilliant. And then another question. So how does this work with multi-channel, for example, web, we've got brackets, Sitecore, and internal systems, SharePoint, for example? I don't know if I fully understand. Is the question about kind of different platforms? It looks like it's a multi-platform. Yeah. So design systems really support multi-platform products. That's kind of one of the fundamental reasons for introducing them. It means that you can standardize things across your product, regardless of the platform that's being used. And there's some really clever examples of people kind of producing these things in a way that means that they can be centrally defined, but then distributed across different platforms from a single source. So yes, it absolutely does work. That would be a very technical conversation that I probably wouldn't be best to lead on if you want to talk about how that kind of actually works. But yeah, it's a design systems support multi-channel and multi-platform products.
Okay, brilliant. I think unless there's any more questions that are going to go up, I think that's it for the questions at this point. If you've got any further questions after this session, please do continue to stick them in the event chat, and we can pick them up and answer them after this session today. So, Amy, thank you very much. Very insightful, and hopefully given people a lot of takeaway points to consider in their own design and journeys moving forward.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.